This job hub map really helps us think about where we are today, and then how, using the levers we've talked about of transportation planning and economic development, we might help shape the map to look differently in the future.
At our fund, we strongly believe that where jobs locate matters. Research, including our own, shows that it's becoming more difficult for individuals in our region to get to jobs because of where they're located. This disconnect causes problems not only for residents, but for businesses, municipalities, and even the environment. In today's episode of G&O Summer Road Trip, I sat down with Peter Truog, our fund's Director of Civic Innovation and Insight, at our fund's office in Cleveland's Midtown neighborhood, to talk about some new research and mapping he's doing to understand where concentrations of jobs, or job hubs as we call them, are in our region, and the potential of this research to improve those connections of people and jobs. Peter started by telling us how job hubs are defined.
Places that have a dense concentration of jobs in a really clearly defined area with multiple different employers. So we were trying to find spots that had a concentration of economic activity that showed up both in the data and also in the way that the place was developed, that really stood out from other parts of the region.
Peter explained how job hubs fit into our mission of growth and opportunity.
At the fund, we see job hubs as a really core component of our growth and opportunity strategy, particularly as it relates to the work that we do around job access. So within job access, what we care about is connecting people to jobs and jobs to people. And when you talk about this in the community, it's sometimes difficult to really understand where jobs are as a starting point for thinking about how to then connect people with those places. And Job Hubs gives us a frame and a really intuitive map that helps people enter that conversation and think more critically about this issue of job access.
I asked Peter how the Job Hubs research was conducted.
This idea of looking at where there's concentrations of jobs and businesses in the economy isn't something that's necessarily brand new to Northeast Ohio. There have been a couple other organizations that have done this before and whose work was really important in helping us think about the methodology and approach that we took to doing this research. As we were starting out, we wanted to draw on all those past examples of research so that we could best inform how we were approaching this problem here in Northeast Ohio. As we were doing the research, then, the census provides a lot of data about where jobs are located across the U.S., and so we were looking specifically across the 4 metropolitan areas here in Northeast Ohio, and pairing that census data with imagery and the knowledge of local partners, just to make sure that the data that we were looking at squared with the development patterns that we saw on the ground and what people understood and knew based on their experience in each of their local areas.
Peter explained further what the methodology was.
So the methodology we used to think about what constituted a job hub relied first on looking at density of jobs across the region. And we focused our identification of job hubs on places that were in the top 5% of job density, so jobs per square mile here in Northeast Ohio. That sort of served as our starting point. And then from there, we paired that information up against satellite imagery from Google Maps to identify places that really adhered to the specific development footprint and built environment around each of these places, so that when we're using these job hubs with economic development organizations or planning organizations, the shapes and places that we're talking about really match up with the shapes and places that those organizations are trying to do work within.
Peter explained that an important characteristic of the Job Hubs research is its focus on the traded sector.
When we say the traded sector, we mean parts of the economy, companies, industries that are able to sell their goods and services, not only here locally, but more broadly across the state, the country, and even internationally. Companies like manufacturing firms or professional service companies who may have local customers, but also can sell to customers in California or in Germany. Those are types of companies that we would call traded companies. That part of the economy you can think of as one part, of opposition to what we call the population serving or local sector of the economy. That sector, unlike the traded sector, really depends on the local market for its business. So you can think of like a restaurant or a retail store whose main customers are those people who live nearby. And unlike traded firms, those companies really depend on the local population to do their business. So when we were looking at what constituted a job hub, we were focused specifically on the traded sector because of its ability to grow and access markets that are much bigger than just the local population here in Northeast Ohio. Companies in these industries typically tend to have higher wages, and the jobs that they create tend to create a bigger spillover effect in the local economy. And so from an economic development perspective, we wanted to really start our search into this job hub question by looking at where those traded sector companies are located in Northeast Ohio.
Some listeners may wonder, won't the free market correct the spatial mismatch issue?
So the idea that the free market is really the only factor in where businesses locate and how our region grows may seem to be the case, but in fact there are a number of ways in which other players have a role in our development that may not be immediately apparent. So two examples that come to mind would one be the incentive packages that are given by state or local governments as a way to influence where businesses are locating. Those incentives exist very separately from the market pricing of land and buildings. And as we've spoken with economic development professionals, they're an important part of the decision-making process when it comes to where executives are thinking of putting their business. Another example would be the role that infrastructure and transportation assets have in where businesses locate. If you look at the map of where job hubs are in our region, you'll notice that a lot of the places are very, very close to the highway infrastructure in our region. And of course, there is a lot of planning and sort of public work that goes into where those roads are placed and then how they're maintained. So it's just another example of how there are these forces that exist and that influence where companies are choosing to locate that are not part of the free market and that we actually have some decision power over. We see the incentives and the decisions about investments and infrastructure as key levers that might be able to help influence the decision-making and development patterns going forward in ways that we haven't been as deliberate about in the past.
I asked Peter about the potential uses of the job hubs research.
So at a very basic level, it's a really helpful tool that we've been using as we do our work with partners around the region to enter into conversations about job access and the importance of thinking more about the spatial patterns of our development going forward. When it comes down to actually bringing it into action, there are a number of promising activities that are in very early stages across the region, but that we're optimistic may help operationalize some of the ideas behind this job hubs work and help change the patterns of development that we see in our region going forward in the future. Whether it's the formation of a potential job hubs task force with local partners who come together to think about how to make their job hubs as competitive and attractive for businesses as possible, to working with transit and transportation agencies to think about how they can best serve their job hubs. There are a number of ways which we're having conversations and working with local partners to bring this research into action.
Peter shared what's next in advancing this research.
So in terms of where we go next with this work, if you look at the maps that are hosted on our website, you can see that we've begun the work in the 4 metropolitan areas around Northeast Ohio, but we would love to continue the discussion with others across the region more broadly and across the state to think about bringing this work into their local places. And so if you're interested in this and see these issues in your local community, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to work with you to think about bringing this to you and the people who you work with.
This is a Summer Road Trip podcast series, so I asked Peter one last question. What was your best summer road trip?
When I was a kid, my family used to do a lot of camping trips. I grew up around Boston, and so there's a lot of woods and nature nearby. So one of my favorite trips was we took a drive up to Bar Harbor, Maine to spend a week doing bike riding and hiking. And I remember the road trip distinctly just because my 2 brothers and I were all so young that I think we were driving my parents crazy as we were sitting in the backseat of the car for what really was not that long of a ride, but at that age seemed an insurmountable amount of time to be stuck in the backseat waiting to get to what was bound to be an exciting vacation.
Thank you to Peter for talking with us about this exciting new work and the potential of the Job Hubs research to improve job access in Northeast Ohio. Thank you to all that are listening, and stay tuned to see where our summer road trip takes us next week.